Welcome, everybody. My name is Jamal Malik. I am the founding member and managing partner for Sales Advantage. And we're going to be talking to Robert Liscano, who is a service practice leader working out of the Southeast and today with AWS. Rob, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jamal. It's a pleasure to be here with you as well as with being part of the Sales Advantage effort.
Thank you. Awesome. And so, Rob, before we begin, is there any additional input or maybe context you'd like to provide about your background you think is relevant for today's discussion?
Absolutely. As an area practice leader for the professional services business within AWS, I'm responsible for roughly 1,000 customers, 11-state geography, where we focus primarily on the larger, more impactful customers and trying to help them transform as our vision within Amazon is to be the most customer-obsessed company in the planet. We tend to always start with the customer, but obviously have some internal metrics as well, but primarily defer to whatever customer decisions need to be made. I manage a team that we call a customer segment team. This spans across the 11 geographies across different segments.
Awesome. Yeah, and customer obsession and centricity is a big a focus area for us as well. And overall, I think what I'd love to kind of talk to you about is your take on sales and business leadership at AWS. Now, one of the things I think is interesting about your background, not only while you're at AWS, but other companies you've worked for. Can you give me maybe like a rough order of magnitude, some of the other kind of organizations you've been a part of?
Absolutely. I have 30 plus years in the business, starting in South America in Lima, Peru, where I'm from originally. I've spent 22 of those 30 plus years at Microsoft in a variety of roles, domestic and internationally, both internal and external, leading businesses, transformational aspects of it as well. Additionally, I worked for a company called DMI, was a mobility company for a 2-year window prior to joining AWS. About $500 million business, global business services company. I've been at AWS for roughly 9 months, having the time of my life, and recognizing how different the experiences are between those companies as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool because again, like you've worked in large enterprises, multinational companies, national companies, not small businesses, but like more locally focused businesses, always within the professional services space. And so now you're with Amazon. How would you describe the culture, especially as it relates to kind of some of the other organizations you've been with? What is it really like at AWS?
This probably requires a several-hour conversation to be able to tell you how Amazon works. But I'll give you my best description after 9 months in the company. It is we are customer obsessed. In my entire 30 plus year, never seen a company that truly lives that experience. And we have 14 leadership principles that guide a lot of what we do. There are certain components and we call them mechanisms of how we operate. For example, we always work backwards from a customer's particular outcome and really follow a lot of their directions and strategies before we execute on any priority. We don't force our customers to live with particular outcomes that measure our metrics. We follow their particular business outcomes and execute based on that. It's a very, very different company, unlike anything I've ever seen, and incredibly empowering and very fun to work with, actually. Very excited, very different.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is, and you and I both were at Microsoft. Microsoft is very, very scorecard driven, obviously based on their own outcomes they're trying to drive. And then you mentioned that at AWS it's very customer outcome driven. So obviously when you and I talk, that is going to make a push into sales, right? Yeah. And so what I'd love to understand at AWS with the focus on customer centricity and obsession, what is the typical sales motion? And more importantly, like how does it differ versus maybe some other places you've been at?
Yeah, I think that every company on the planet tries to start with the concept of business outcome. It's a customer's business outcome. And what do we do with that? And how do we start there? And how do you let it guide your business? And throughout my career and years as well, the opportunities we had to work together, we've always had the ability to follow the customer versus follow your metric. I will tell you, probably one of the better examples that I can share now is I've had situations even within the AWS where I'm talking to the top three C-level in one of the largest customers that I have, a nearly $30 billion customer. We're discussing a particular challenge, and the conversation has nothing to do with a metric, nothing to do with my priorities, all to do with the particular deliverables that they have. And we brainstorm and make financial impactful decisions without thinking about my metrics, but thinking about their business. And that's a lot of how you live with, I guess. And you make a bet, you make a leap of faith that the steps that you're taking, because they're aligned to the customer, will translate into results for your business. And it's to some degree a risk and a confidence that you're going to have, that you're going to execute on the customers. They're going to translate into customer benefits, and therefore your business will be taken care of.
And so, and I think it's really interesting, and I want to kind of drill on that a little bit, because if I heard you correctly, what you're saying is like, look, it's not about our outcomes, it's about driving a customer's outcomes. But at the end of the day, when you're a publicly traded company, you have, certain metrics you're trying to achieve, revenue goals, right? Especially when it comes to reporting out to Wall Street every quarter, kind of how you're doing. So how do you balance the internal need to achieve certain revenue goals when, and then maybe kind of back end that to getting the customer what they need? Because it seems like those two ideas are intrinsically challenging to one another, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll tell you what I did when I joined AWS, which is not that different than what I've done when I looked at different businesses. You have to look at your entire business portfolio and decide what are those customers that I can grow, the customers that I'm going to be able to sustain flat, and the customers that I'll probably take a loss, or I either have to invest longer term to get a return. When I joined, this business was, let's just say, the more than triple digit growth, very successful. So how do you grow from where you are? And I picked up study, and what we call is dive deep is one of our principles. Dove deep in the scenario to understand what specifically made us very successful and how do I triplicate that. So I took that and literally multiplied it by 3 and said, there's this 3 profile of customers that made us very successful. So I made a bet in that business that if we can duplicate the same customer profile, because part of, as you know, is we got to aim, we got to spend a lot more time aiming. We spend way too much time shooting, right, and race into a business. In this case, I know I'm going to prioritize my largest customers. I'm going to make an investment and dedicate key leaders that I'm going to hire to each of those customers. That's been one of the most successful parts of our business. And I knew that going into a customer that already has some credibility with you, that is transforming, is innovating, that definitely has the need and the services that you can provide, allowed me to expand. And then I went ahead and invested in other customer segments and other customer territories where I knew that it will give us an opportunity to grow those customers over a 1, 2, 3 year window. Those were the ones that I felt would not be able to produce right away. But the balance is that I'm executing on my targets now. I'm able to grow those existing customers, but also investing on the customers for next year and the year after and the year after. Is that balance what I think most sales leaders and other leaders have to do? And then certainly, last but not least, and probably should have started with that, is hire great people. Right. Great people is where everything starts and ends. And I feel that I dedicated probably my 9 months, probably 70% of my time hire and onboarding talent. And I brought in about over 400 years worth of enterprise experience just in a number of folks that were able to help us establish the business and prepare for next year. Those two have been the combination of the things that have made us, giving us some additional success and further success compared to the great success that my peer had last year. But those are the foundational elements, in my opinion, to get us going.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because what I heard from you is, like, okay, obviously as a business leader, you have a number that you have to hit. That comes with, the territory. But when you start talking about hitting that number, what I heard from you is really what you do is you look at the profile of customer you have, and you help that drive how much time you spend with whom. So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is based on the profile, I spend X amount of time, and the belief is the time that I spend with them will result into business that will help me achieve my goals.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that leap of faith that you got to take, that spending time with those customers at the right level will translate the result. At the same time, you got to be willing to let go of the urgent that is not important, and really be hardcore about prioritizing your time. and ensuring that those customers and the next wave of customers we're investing give you the result as well. But there's a third element that you're touching on that is very critical. Once you establish that strategy and direction, is execution discipline, which is very hard. It's strategy, you can aim really well at executing. It doesn't really matter.
Right. Yeah, it all falls down. Right. No, that's great. And I think so, in a sales capacity, and again, I'm just going to use, I think my understanding of kind of how you're thinking about sales. So aside from revenue metrics, are there other metrics that you use on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis to gauge, am I doing the right things that ultimately will result in the return that I expect? Like, how do you know? How do you gauge that?
There's a few that I've learned over the years. Everybody focuses so much on the day, the week, the month, and the quarter. That's so deadly because the problems are things that we didn't do 6 months ago. My team will tell you they will tell you exactly that I spend a lot more of my time on the 3 months ahead, 6 months ahead, 9 months ahead. So there's a term that I picked up from our years at Microsoft called Q+1.
Right.
The whole idea is I'm now trying to spend time on April, May, June. How is my pipeline? How is my business? What customers would I have? What kind of sold revenue, bookings revenue versus invoice revenue would I have? So I think that usually adjust and change the experience, or that one of probably the most examples or experiences I had that I in my 10 years. I spent some time with the China team, and we were working on a particular deal. And this particular deal at the time was purely consulting, $1 million. And as I dug into the deal with the sales leaders over there, I discovered that this is what the customer had pegged us to be. This is just for your business what I think you can do $1 million. But this was a major transformation, major over the tune of 30, 40, $50 million transformation. Yet the customer only had assigned $1 million for what we could do. So we again re-evaluated that and told the rep as well as our sales leader, what if we delay this and wait it for another 3 months? Don't put in the forecast, don't rush it.
Right.
Really re-engineer the deal with the customer to find out what else are they trying to do. That deal was closed at $4 million a few months later because we delayed it, we didn't rush it. We didn't take what the customer was thinking, but worked backwards and kind of shifted what the customer was thinking, the way they viewed the value that we could add into re-evaluating the value, re-engineering the value proposition, and for the customer to see everything else that we could do for them. And that's not only the business expanded, the relationship expanded. But you got to be willing to take time. Going back to the fact that you're so focused on the day, the week, the month, and the quarter, you're going to take that $1 million and walk into it and say, I got to put in my forecast. You got to be patient and willing to look at it long term. But this means that you have to be willing to pick the right customers and execute well on them for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I want to kind of dive deeper into a couple of things you said, again, which is really, really piquing my interest, right? So the first thing is that, what I would love to understand your perspectives around is how you balance, and again, if I'm asking the wrong question, or maybe even I need to ask it differently, right? You're a business leader, you're a sales leader, you've got a number you've got to hit by the end of the year, what have you, right? So, what type of direction do you get from your leadership team, and what direction do you provide to your sales teams to say, okay, look, we're not going to hit this number for this quarter or this month. It's going to come later, right? So give me some insights into like the actual metrics you look at, because it sounds like you do look at the same sales numbers, but you don't take decision and action on it the same way as maybe other organizations do.
Correct. So when I took over, I knew my business was transforming. I was inheriting a small number of practice managers that I knew would be overloaded because we're unstaffed, severely understaffed in terms of that capacity. But I also knew that I was learning that I had to hire a lot of people, onboard a lot of people. So what I did is I told my boss at the time, I'm going to have a limited set of targets that I have to take on for a period of time until I'm able to execute fully when I have fully staffed. So I committed on a handful of metrics. One of those was bookings, which is sold revenue or sold from when it comes to consulting, sold deals. The second one I committed to is I'm going to hire on board. I got to get these people, a lot of the talent in place across all the different geographies. We're severely understaffed. And once I get that going, I knew I can grow the business, right? Everything starts with great talent. So what allowed me to, the few practice managers I had in place that were tenured, I left them alone. And I told my team, I'm going to leave them alone. They're not going to be engaged on anything but execution. So allow me to actually have them the freedom to execute as fast as they could in driving revenue, while allow me to spend the rest of my time onboarding, hiring, which is a key priority for us. Now that I'm relatively fully staffed, the measurements are changing. So what happened at the same time, I was able to deliver a high growth trajectory that we wanted to see, and everything starts with that almighty dollar. And I knew that when we had good revenue numbers or good bookings number, my boss will have confidence that I will be able to deliver the rest of the numbers, the rest of the indicators. Because like anybody else, we have financials, we have non-financial
Right.
metrics. So I candidly, I did not pay a lot of attention to the non-financial metrics because I knew that if I started with the others, other than hiring and recruiting, I knew I could build my business. Now that I'm there, I can begin to shift my focus and my priorities to ensure that we have a more balanced set of results.
Right.
But that bought me the time and the freedom to tell my management, trust me, I'm going to deliver and be able to deliver. I think that is a key competence that I look for and my leadership looks for, is that level of predictability, right?
Right.
Tell me to do something and do it. Even if it is to a narrow degree, or tell me you're going to give some priority to certain targets and different priority to others, and I'm delivering the prayers that I agreed to, it gave them confidence that I'm going to continue to deliver. Now I can give you an example. My bookings targets have gone from ranging in accuracy from 20%, 30% a month, if you could believe that. Most people in most companies won't survive. So I told management, give me time. They're now ranging in the 90% range, 90 to 110% range on a given month. And we're likely to be one of the more successful businesses ending the year compared to the rest of the US.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, Rob, right? Because I think the word customer obsession, customer centricity, it gets thrown around a lot, right? And what's interesting is at the end of the day, what's actually going to help an organization pivot to more customer centricity, more customer obsession, interestingly, are leaders, right? That have that as a priority, because what I'm hearing from you, is like, look, in order for me to be customer focused and customer obsessed, I got to make sure I have the right people. We're executing well. We're going to get to those bookings. You've been with Amazon for 9 months. You figure the first 6 months is getting the shop in order, right? You're probably not hitting the booking numbers like the business is expecting to you, but you as a leader, you're pushing back and you're saying, listen, let's not focus on achieving short-term gains, short-term benefit, until we're in a place where we're able to execute and operate effectively, efficiently, and then you'll see that the bookings will come, right? And that's effectively what I hear is happening. So I think, interestingly, in a very, very weird way, customer obsession doesn't start with the customer. It starts with leaders who believe that that's important. Then going back to the business and saying, hey, be patient, wait, right? Doing what you need to do now. And then ultimately, once you build credibility with the leaders on your side, then, as you mentioned, like they want predictability in the business. You say you're going to do it, and then you do it, right? You do that over and over again. And then, it's like kind of a recipe to kind of build your business. It's not like you just show up and you're saying, hey, we're going to be customer obsessed. It doesn't work like that.
Absolutely. And one more thing I would add is that predictability that my management expects from me. If I tell them I'm going to deliver on this metric and I'm going to deliver it and I continue to deliver it, they give me the freedom and the additional resources to get that done. Likewise, with my leaders on my organization, I set the same expectation. The more you deliver in line with what you told me you're going to deliver, I will continue to invest and grow and give you more resource capacity. I can tell you that specifically from a bookings perspective, our business has been fairly successful this year, despite the fact that I'm new, despite the fact that 80% of my organization is within 4 months. It takes a long time to onboard, yet we've been able to exceed. I think we're about 45% ahead of target for the year in bookings and likely end at about 200+% growth year over year, which is better than my predecessor. But a lot of it starts with people, it starts with discipline, as well as with ensuring that we are prioritizing. So much comes at you every day, and my team hears that from me a lot, is so much as what you create intentionally and purposeful and predictively and proactively, and kind of draw the line of the things that may not create a lot of value to the customer, or maybe create maybe short-term value, and which is not often what the
Right.
customer is looking for.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think, I'd love to maybe kind of segue this into getting more in the meat of what I would say is your leadership slash like management style, right? Um, Give me, the Rob Lascano's top three kind of leadership principles in roles such as these, if I could.
Great question. I tend to tailor my style to the individual that I'm leading. The Meaning that I tend to adjust what they are they conservative, are they liberal, are they realistic in terms of how they look at a number, how they look at their targets, and I tend to balance that in a way that always challenge them and gives an opportunity to learn. I tend to focus very much on this servant leadership style of being able to really be a support structure, be the one that is removing obstacles. But also, I want them to think in the same way. One of my good friends from Microsoft will tell me, Robert, you were the toughest manager I've ever worked for in my 25 years in the industry, but I wouldn't trade a minute of it because I've learned a ton. I'm hoping that that's what they say about me, and that the fact that I want us to grow and expand and change and continue to improve what we do for our customers and challenge them to grow and expand their business, and always learn along the way and have fun along the way. But at the same time, I think it is the everybody has to be willing to increase their threshold for change, because
Right.
one constant that happens in our business is change. And so I want to make sure that everyone in my organization is continuously evolving and developing new skills, exercising new muscles or new leadership principles, as we call it, in terms of the competencies that are expanding or practicing or learning, including failure, because that is the closest path to success and learning, is figuring out those mistakes. But it's a combination of all of those things that really matter to me as a leader, and recognizing certainly in the individual and genuine nature of what somebody's trying to do and why they're here. Are they here because they want a career? Are they here because they want to learn? Are they here because there are a variety of other reasons? You got to tailor that coaching and leadership style to the individual along the way. Hope that helps.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think maybe I'd love to have you on again in the future. We can do a dedicated session just on, leadership and management styles. But I think one thing that I'd love to hear from you, though, is that, again, with the context of just now working with AWS, what is a leadership trait or a management approach that maybe you used to use, but you've maybe put aside or adjusted now that you're at AWS?
Great question. And I believe strongly in leadership is all about self-awareness. And all of us are in this journey of self-awareness. I've spent a ton of time in my career learning about myself, being told so many things that I had to improve and working to improve them. So with that in context, I used to be a horrific micromanager. And people will tell me that I used to do that. And although I've elevated my style to a different altitude, I still get too involved. And I'm working towards moving further out and trusting and empowering the team. And what I've learned about my own limitation, because that is a big part of it, is you're only as far as your closest limitation, and you got to find what that bias is that you can remove and recognize where it's becoming a blocker. Is that I love the business that we're in. I love the unique opportunity we have in services to take a customer from one end of the spectrum to the other and hold their hand all the way through the process, watch them transform, watch them innovate. There isn't a better industry and industry or capability to be able to do that. So it keeps me involved because I love the business that way. It's not necessarily that I want to micromanage, I want my team to, because I question my team, but it does come across often that you're not very empowering, you're not trusting the team. Indeed, I do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what I've learned over the years, and I think is one of the most humbling experience is when somebody in your team tells you flat out, back off or step back, I'm handling it.
Right.
And I really realized that even though I didn't intend to micromanage them, that I empower them enough to be comfortable telling me where I'm too involved. It may give the impression that I'm not, but it is one of those cultural attributes for you. The further up you go, the less feedback you get. And I've managed organizations over the years, and after that, you lose touch on what's going on day to day. But this ability for a leader to tell you flat out to your face something that you may not normally want to hear is incredibly powerful. So I treasure it, and I tell my team I get humble when I get any type of feedback, and I treasure it certainly. And those are the moments that really help you learn, when you realize there's something you're doing that may not be benefiting your team, regardless of the reasons that you're doing it. If that helps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, what I heard from all that, if I just kind of was to kind of distill it down for myself is, you know, um, wanting to be involved every step of the way is a very natural human tendency, right? However, like in order for you to scale, in order for you to empower other people, in order for you as a leader help you, other people grow, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what leadership is about, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to let go. You have to create space and opportunity for others to kind of step up and step in and make their own decisions, right? Otherwise, people will always see you as a crutch. People will never fully reach their potential, right? And that's interesting because at the end of the day, you want to help out. You want to see people succeed, but if you don't allow them the opportunity even to fail, right,
Absolutely.
and make mistakes,
Yes.
they never will. And so now in your role, AWS, I mean, you have a pretty large territory. You've got a team that I'm sure you engage with fairly regularly to give direction to, but more often than not, you have to withhold from doing the work
Yes.
versus assigning the work and then look at the results. Is that about right?
You have to empower the
Yep.
team and trust that they're going to get it done, and they will show you better ways to get it done than what would if you come up on your own. And
Right.
it's a very challenging skill and experience. The further up you go, there's a friend of mine that used to tell me leadership is very lonely. And the further up you go, the less and less feedback you get. So the more difficult it becomes to know how the business is running.
Right.
Establishing those listening vehicles and that coaching mechanisms is what makes you successful.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And if I was to maybe kind of, you know, just add a little bit more of sales context into this, and then maybe if you could, share a real world example, I think would be great too. But, what would be your recommendation for sellers and sales teams who are looking to build kind of better relationships with their customers?
You have to invest. You have to be willing to invest in two ways. These two are to me the most critical elements what a customer is looking for. Invest in getting to know them, get understanding really what they're trying to drive. Don't jump into technology. Don't jump at what you know. Listen and allow the customer to describe what they're really trying to do long term and what their fears, their issues are. Most customers are willing to give you the time if they see that learn to be curious, which is one of our principles, the desire to want to learn and understand them. And sometimes, even if you don't know the industry, I've had many customers that gave me, one of my favorite examples is a customer in Nashville that gave me 4 hours of their time. And literally, the entire 4 hours shared with us what they're trying to do in an aspect of the industry that had not been involved before. It was incredibly rich conversation. The second thing you got to do is be willing to tell customers what they don't want to hear, which is really hard to do. And I can tell you one of the probably most powerful examples is in customers telling you, don't tell me the 2 or 3 options, tell me the one option. Right? So this is customers' feedback they've given us recently. And so being able to tell them, you know what, you're heading in the wrong direction. And there's a quote that an old boss of mine says, you're choosing to buy a car, but you're choosing to not have a radio. You realize you're not your music. You
Right.
understand?
Right. Right.
What happens later is the customer is frustrated that they're not hearing music, and they blame you or the involved because you didn't tell them. So be
Right.
clear, tell them. And then the customers are looking for advisors, trusted advisors. They're not looking for somebody to sell them something.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's great. I think that's great feedback. And I'd love to even maybe hear an example from you. You have an incredibly diverse background and a really rich experience spanning 3 decades. What's an example in a sales capacity of something that didn't go well, that didn't go the way you expected? And then what did you learn out of it?
We had a very large opportunity that we were working with, and a very large customer spent months invested heavily towards getting to understand where the customer is trying to go and put a lot of resources. We really understood exactly what they were trying to go. We did not plan for is the customer had a couple of other major distractions underway at all levels in the company, particularly the levels that needed to approve and sign off on this. And we knew that this delay was going to radically impact our business long term. And I think at the time I did a couple of the things that sometimes you miss. One is I empowered and trusted the team to execute. And sometimes as a leader, you have the advantage of being a bit of an outsider to your team. The team gets so involved in seeing something day to day, they miss sometimes some basic things.
Mm-hmm.
And I came in and out, but I wasn't steadily staying in the opportunity with the team enough to see the risks of the distractions that the customer is facing. And so that was very painful. And but I think the most important thing to do in that situation is really to gather the learning and the real, call it unbiased, the unbiased opportunity or unbiased learning for the individual, the team, individuals on the team, as well as to us. And even if you can go back to the customer to say, what could we have done differently to really be in a different position at the end? In this particular case, we didn't lose it to a competitor. It impacted a timeline that the customer had committed that they wanted to avoid. There's usually those are amazing lessons and opportunities to learn. So really to come into those situations at the tail end of it when you fail, to really be looking for that rich experience that you'll never forget. What is the thing that you could have done differently that would have prevented the situation where you are today?
So actually, in that scenario you gave, what would you have done differently? Or what could you have done differently? Yeah.
I think we neglected the potential for that, and we should have stayed close to the C levels that we were. Not the one level that we were working with was giving us a lot of guidance, was embracing, was clearly sponsoring. The one level above, we were not engaged enough. And it's typical. You assume that individual is managing the power, the communications, and they were not. And there were miscommunications at that point. By the time we got into it, it was late. Is it typical, right? You missed.
So it sounded like the buying team was a lot broader than was initially maybe imagined or maybe kind of understood, or the sponsor that you were working with was not communicating to the buying team or the individual who was making the buying decision like you had hoped, and ultimately it resulted in an outcome that was not favorable. And it sounds like had you had the opportunity to kind of do it over again, you would build a relationship with that level of executive audience, 1 or 2 or 3, whatever it was, and made sure that you had a better connection and rapport there.
Yeah, it was a combination of both of those areas. One, there were clearly priorities were shifting along the way. Company is very complex, going through a lot of change as we speak. That was part of it, that our sponsor C-level, because they were spending time with us, spending time on the other past aspects of the initiative, not spending enough time in educating us on the different priorities that were shifting. Point number 2 is we did spend enough time getting guidance and direction on the upper tier C-level. We just didn't get the enough continual attention. Like you normally do is when you're operating with a deal this size, you have a steering committee that meets every 2 weeks.
Right.
Did not have that opportunity to be able to stay connected and know that if there were things changing that we were aware and working with the customer on the way to evolve them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Hey, Rob, listen, I can't thank you enough for taking the time and spending your afternoon with us. It's always amazing connecting with you and hearing about, your own career journey and the experiences. It's always so insightful. Anything else you'd like to leave with us or want to share with the audience at all?
First of all, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure connecting with you, and I love the opportunity to share this with others as well as learn from others. The one thing I would leave you with is one of my favorite quotes as it relates to the world that we live in. Technology is transforming people's lives day in and day out. So it's a favorite quote that says, "It's not the fastest of the smartest or the strongest of the species that survive, is the most adaptable that survives."
Right.
And that's what we all have to be, constantly changing, evolving, being willing to take new thinking and new approaches. But thanks for the opportunity. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much. We care a ton about customer obsession, customer centricity, and ethical selling, which, you're so closely aligned with. Again, it's just always a joy to have you engage with us and share again your insights and perspectives and vision. So again, have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much, giving us some insights into AWS culture and selling and leadership style. And I'd love to have you on again, and we can go dive deeper in a few areas.
Would love to. Thanks, Jamal.
Awesome. Have a great rest of the day. Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye.